conhecem a paz. Que todas as pessoas em todo o mundo sintam plena felicidade. Que todos os seres por toda parte finalmente vivam em paz. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all people everywhere finally find peace of mind. May all people everywhere finally know peace. May all beings everywhere finally find happiness. May all people everywhere finally know peace. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. 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 I think it's only fair people who arrive on time get a song. Do we have most people on? Or the ones who are here? I think we'll just go ahead and start, huh?
Okay, yes.
Good. Let's chant Om. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Great to see all these beautiful smiling faces. It's just like I'm in the IY tree training looking out in the audience. Hi, everyone. Everyone hear me okay? Great. Okay, let's go to my slides. There it is. So they can see half me and half the slides? Great.
Yes, just tell them to go to side-by-side view.
And everyone got our instructions from Maria on how to go to side-by-side view. Is everyone seeing half slides and half me? It's something called side-by-side view, and it's on the instructions you got from Maria. I'm going to raise this just a little bit so my head's not cut off. Okay. Everyone seeing me okay? Great. Now I'm in charge of the slides? Okay. Great. Everyone give me a thumbs up if you're on side-by-side view. You see me okay? Great. If not, and you couldn't find side-by-side view, that means you're like me. Completely technically Don't even think about it. Yoga Sutras, Samadhi Pada, first chapter. So we're going to start by, I'm just going to be able to, I'm going to have to be able to see my whole slide here, Maria. Maybe just move it over to the left or move me out, or there you go. That's good.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So we're going to start with the Patanjali mantra. We'll just say it a little pieces at a time. And then next week, we'll actually be going through the complete Patanjali mantra and understanding it a little bit. Yogena chittasya. Yogena chittasya. Padena vacham. Malam sharirasya. Chavaidhyakena yopakarotam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi, and then all together. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya chavaidhyakena yopakarotam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi. With hands folded, I bow respectfully to Patanjali, best of sages, who dispel the impurities of the mind with yoga, of speech through grammar, and of the body by means of Ayurvedic medicine. I need to have control of my slides here. My slides aren't working.
Can you try again?
No, slides not working. Okay, I'm going to need to be able to control my slides, Maria. Okay. So beginning just with gratitude first to Carlos Eduardo Barboza, Sanskrit scholar and expert on the Yoga Sutras, who supports me in this project, and of course, without whose help, wouldn't be able to teach all this Sanskrit. And of course, to the man that many of you know or have heard of, Dr. Ananda Balayogi Bhavanani, the director of the ICYR, International Center of Yoga Education and Research in Pondicherry. And I give my salutations to Dr. Ananda because I feel he and his family represent the essence of yoga and of the Yoga Sutras. You can find a lot of Dr. Ananda's presentations on YouTube. And so look him up on YouTube, lots of wonderful information. So we're going to go straight into the introduction. So you received an introductory page, and you also received the first 4 pages of the rough draft of my new book. And am I able to see time here? Could you grab my my thing so I can see the time? Just my phone. Okay. And so we're only going to spend a half an hour on this introduction. We won't finish it all today, and there's more to the introduction. So we're just going to do a little bit of it each time we meet over the next 4 weeks. So of course, the Yoga Sutras, approximately 2,000 years old. It's the principal text of the Yoga Darshan. Darshan meaning a vision, one of the 6 darshanas or visions of yoga. And it's the vision of life's purpose and meaning as recognition of our true being. And made up of 196 short aphorisms called sutras. And these aphorisms, they're really a compilation of, at least from Patanjali's perspective, what would be the most important teachings of yoga up to that point. I have to remember where my camera's looking at me. I'm not very much of a zombie yet, but I'm getting better. We're all going to be zombies by the time this is over. I need to move the slides, Maria. I can't have you moving the slides. I need to be able to move them. Okay. So it's Introduction to the Yoga Sutras. Yoga Sutras divided into 4 chapters. The first chapter, the one we're going to be going over in the next 4 weeks, the Samadhi Pada, showing the foundations of the spiritual journey. And then, of course, the second chapter, the practices used for this journey. The third chapter, the experiences that we encounter along the journey. And then the fourth chapter, what is the destination of this journey? So clarifying the nature of spiritual liberation. Okay, now it's working. So this is Patanjali right from the start says that this isn't an original work by him. It's a synthesis of everything that existed up to his time. And we see that from the very first word in the Yoga Sutras, atta, meaning now, in the last word, et, meaning conclusion. So when you put those two, atta, et, together, it means thus it has been taught. So Patanjali, in a certain way, is paying homage to his teachers, the ones who taught him, and that he is passing on their teachings. Okay, I can't have you moving the slides. Okay. One of us has got to be in charge here. If you keep moving my slides, I'm not going to know what I'm doing. Okay? So, and what are these influences? So who were Patanjali's teachers in a certain way? Of course, Buddhism was important because within the Yoga Sutras, we see a very precise scientific approach to the discipline of meditation. The Patanjali, about 500 years, at least 500 years after the time of the Buddha. And so Buddhism, really a major presence in India at the time of Patanjali. You could imagine at the time of Patanjali, a lot of saffron-robed monks wandering everywhere because, of course, Buddhism would have been a very strong force, and Buddhism, of course, with its strong focus on meditation. Also on the elimination of suffering. If we think of going back to the Vedas, that focus on suffering, elimination of suffering, a life as suffering, and a need to change our lives so that we eliminate limitations, so that we eliminate suffering. We find that in Buddhism. We also find it in the Upanishads, not as strongly as in Buddhism. So this is something that Patanjali is taking. And if someone would like to do a little study, a real interesting study is to look at those 4 noble truths of Buddhism, and then to look at the first 4 sutras. And we'll see that in a certain way, Patanjali is reinforcing the 4 noble truths of Buddhism in the first 4 sutras. These first 4 sutras, which we're going to be working on today, we say that if you can understand the first 4 sutras, you can understand the whole of the 196 Yoga Sutras. Of course, understanding those first 4 sutras is a lifelong task. And so Patanjali also is a student of the Upanishads. And of course, the Upanishads, the main body of spiritual philosophy in India, apart from Buddhism. And we see certain things like the limbs of yoga, at least 5 of the limbs of yoga, already present in the Maitreya Upanishad from 1,000 years before the time of Patanjali. So that idea of limbs of yoga and a graded path, these things are already present in the Upanishads. I need to be able to move my own cursor.
Can you now?
I don't think so, but let's just leave it alone for now. Okay. We also see the Upanishads, we also see the importance of Ishvara and Om. So within the Upanishads, this quest to know oneself as the divine, as Ishvara, or even in a greater sense, as Brahman. This is really the essence of the Upanishads and all of Indian philosophy in a certain way. And of course, we find that in the Upanishads, many of the Upanishads, their entire Upanishads just dedicated to Om. And we find that same focus on Om also in the Yoga Sutras. Okay, can't move my cursor yet. Can't move my slides yet. Now it did. Okay. Okay. Okay, so now we're going on to Samkhya philosophy. Once we get my slides under control, I'll be good. Once I'm truly a zombie, then all of these technical problems, a zombie, all of these technical problems will go away. So, of course, the foundation of the Yoga Sutras is Samkhya philosophy. Predates Patanjali by about 500 years, and it forms the overall framework of the Yoga Sutras. So if we say, what's the foundation? What's the philosophical foundation? Of course, that's going to be Samkhya. And we see that in the distinction very clearly made in very many areas between Prakriti and Purusha. And we see that from the beginning of the Yoga Sutras right until the very end. And especially so strong in chapter 4, where he makes this distinction. No matter how purified you become at the level of Prakriti, no matter how sattvic your mind may be, no matter how purified your buddhi may be, that is still within Prakriti. It's separate from Purusha. Then he comes to the very end of the Yoga Sutras, where you've actually overcome all of the 5 elements, you've gone beyond all of the gunas, and he says, now your work is complete. Now you've done everything that you needed to do. You've gone completely beyond the gunas. You've gone completely beyond Prakriti. So this foundation of Samkhya, of this distinction between Prakriti and Purusha, we see it in almost every sutra from beginning to end. Also, of course, the importance given to the 3 gunas. Samkhya, while it forms a foundation, it's also distinct. Many traditions of Samkhya are non-theistic, not directly theistic, whereas within the Yoga Sutras, Ishvara, the Lord of creation, has an important presence. We say in the sutra format, we're going to see that in a little while, that nothing should be repeated. The idea is, if you've repeated anything, now I do repeat myself from time to time, but I'm not Patanjali. And so the idea of the sutra format is not to repeat. So when things are repeated, they should be repeated for a purpose. And Ishvara is there in about 6 different contexts, and Ishvara Pranidhana. So it's definitely not a mistake. It's not a typo that Patanjali made. So to have Patanjali, to have him put Ishvara in there that much, it was something that was really important to him. And so the Yoga Sutras are really theistic in that sense. The other way that the Yoga Sutras are distinct from Samkhya is Samkhya is very much a philosophy, and their methodology was something called Viveka. It was a rational methodology, a deep rationality, if you want to call it that, but it's still a kind of rationality. And for Patanjali, really the whole methodology is Samadhi. There are all of these other wonderful tools, but from my understanding, all of the different tools within the Yoga Sutras are all getting you ready to practice Samadhi. So he also gives a lot of tools for daily living, but those 2 support our Samadhi, and our Samadhi supports our ability to live with more clarity in our day-to-day. And so Samadhi is really the whole practice from Patanjali's perspective. I don't know all the Samkhya texts, but from my understanding, they're not based in meditation, so that's a huge difference. And then when we find the 6 systems of Indian philosophy, they're organized in pairs. So one is always theory and one is practice. So yoga is matched with Samkhya. So Samkhya is a theory and yoga is a practice. So they fit together. They can't be seen separately. And yet they do very different things. One is to give us the vision, and then Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. How do we put that vision into place? Okay, I need to be able to change my slide. Maybe I'll just tell you to change my slides. I'll just say, Maria, change my slides. Good. You'll meet Maria someday soon. She's here with her mask on. Everyone here in Brazil has our masks on. Fortunately, our community has not had any problems, but still we're all with our masks. As we said, Samadhi is the heart and essence of the Yoga Sutras. And what do we do? What do we want to do with this Samadhi? We want to experience ourselves as Purusha, as pure consciousness, absolutely free and inherently complete, because it's only in that experience of sensing ourselves as absolutely free, totally complete, that we will actually be able to release this attachment to Prakriti. As long as there's something in it for us in Prakriti, we're always going to maintain some kind of attachment. And so ultimately what we want to do is see that I just don't need anything else. I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and by golly, people like me. So we see that we're so complete that nothing is really required from material creation. Things just couldn't be any better than they are, just being myself. Make sense? Everyone hearing me? Thumbs up? Okay. Next slide. So not all of these traditions that are called yoga have this huge focus on samadhi, and some actually make fun of it. Of course, there's the famous joke to make fun of samadhi, these traditions that don't like samadhi. The guru who went into samadhi, he asked his disciple for a glass of water, went into samadhi for 100 years, came back, and the first thing he said was, of course, it wasn't that same disciple anymore. It was the disciple's grandchild, I suppose. And he says, where's my glass of water? So not all of the approaches to yoga have this dramatic focus on samadhi, but all of them, whatever their means, are all looking for this essence of clarity, of connection with our true being, so that we can take that into our daily lives. That's the essence of enlightened living. And that's what the Yoga Sutras is teaching. My own experience is that meditation, regular meditation practice, is absolutely essential. And of course, I might not be one of those most advanced students that can do it without meditation. But for me, meditation is absolutely essential. So next. So we talked about Patanjali sort of bringing together all of these things that happened earlier in yoga. So he took from Buddhism, he took from Samkhya, he took from the Upanishads, and so he brought that all together in Yoga Sutras. But interestingly, Patanjali is also a precursor of all that is to come. Dr. Ananda says that Patanjali is actually a being from the future who went back in time to bring these teachings to people. So Patanjali was from that enlightened point in the future where all things could be known, went back to the era of Patanjali. And so that's how Patanjali, according to Dr. Ananda, would know these things. But also we find not only the past of yoga within the Yoga Sutras, we also find the future. We find Tantra Yoga, we find Hatha Yoga. Go ahead, next slide. And so we find all of these visualizations. In chapter 3, we find all of these visualizations of the subtle body, including the chakras, the pranavayus, the nadis. So some people say, well, Patanjali didn't know all the chakras. We got them in our 200-hour yoga teacher training, but Patanjali only mentioned 4. And so, but it's very common. It's very common in these sutras because of their compact format, not to mention every single thing. So he mentions some sutras, he mentions some pranavayus, he mentions some elements, he mentions some nadis, but obviously what he's showing is that he has command of all of those areas. And they are the essence, they are the heart of what we'll find later in Tantra and Hatha Yoga. So Patanjali is this incredible bridge between the past and the future of yoga. So, and then when we look at asana and pranayama, so you can say that there are only three or four verses on each, but when you explore those verses, you see that everything that needs to be said about the philosophy of asana and pranayama is already contained there. And so if you can take what's written in those verses on asana and pranayama and bring them into your practice, we already have a very complete definition of asana and pranayama. So both Tantra and Hatha Yoga already laid out. So let's, next slide. So let's look at this, this sutra tradition. So this Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, it's a part of a much broader tradition characterized by short aphorisms called sutras. So many different sutras on all kinds of themes that you can imagine. I think there's even a cooking sutra. So it could be very helpful if we have to stay in quarantine, check out that cooking sutra and see what kind of recipes are in it. And so short and compact pieces of information. It's in very sharp contrast to the great spiritual mythologies of India. For example, the Mahabharata, longest poem ever written with 200,000 individual verse lines. So if you compare 196 to 200,000, everything spiritual you can find in India somewhere or in some tradition. So we can say in India, you'll find the most compact and you'll also find the most expansive. So some students need something that's very compact. Some students just need to be bombarded, I imagine, with those 200,000 verses of the Mahabharata, and of course, of which the Bhagavad Gita is a part. But very different approaches. But of course, the Yoga Sutras is part of this very compact sutra tradition. So, of course, the word sutra literally means a thread, and it's related to our English cognates, so and suture. So these are pearls of wisdom strung on the thread of a spiritual tradition. And so we should only have the very most compact essence of all the ideas. And that allows for easy memorization, which there's almost no repetition change. So obviously the Yoga Sutra wants to present all of these in a compact way, but what we're going to see is the Yoga Sutras, it's kind of like it's this little tiny box, and then when you start to unpack it, things keep coming out. It's kind of like a magic act. Things keep coming out, and this comes out, and a bear comes out, and a hat, and then things keep coming out and out and out and out. And so even though the sutras are very compact, there's almost limitless information. And if you were really going to go through the Yoga Sutras, you would need at least 1 hour per sutra to begin to do them justice. And so that's why we have people like Dr. Ananda who can unpack these sutras fully. The conciseness of the Yoga Sutras, how do they get it down? So they just took out the verbs. So just 4 verbs in the whole sutra. And of course, the verb to be is implied. And so where it says yoga is stilling the movements of the mind, it just says yoga, stilling movements of the mind. So the verb to be is implied. So by having the verbs implied and a lot of other shortcuts, they managed to bring it down into that compact size. Next. So as we mentioned before, that these themes like Ishvara Pranidhana that we have in 6 different places, Patanjali in all that limited space, he's not going to repeat any of that. unless it's really for a reason. The important thing about the sutras is they can be used as part of the daily practice, so they can all be chanted in less than an hour. They're wonderful, wonderful material for that on the internet. Dr. Ananda has one that's just beautiful. Another one by Kaustubh Desikachar, very accessible. And there's another one called Sanskrit Channel. So those three, all from India, very accessible, very easy to follow, and very helpful for learning to chant all the sutras. And next. Well, once memorized, each sutra becomes a seed that when watered and nourished with time, dedication, and sincerity, blossoms into self-knowledge. So we'll talk about this a little bit more. So what is this blossoming of self-knowledge? So for me, the study of the sutras has been something that I've been doing daily for the last 15 years. And so it's something called Svadyaya, where each of us takes one course of study, whether it's the sutras or Bhagavad Gita or a text of Tantra, and we study it as fully as we can. We'll never study these things fully, but we study as fully as we can. And so for me, the last 15 years, the sutras was my Svadyaya. I still study every day, at least an hour. And so this book, which will be coming out soon, the Yoga Sutras in Practice, it's my term paper. So I completed my course, 15 years, and now my paper isn't done, but it's due. And so that's why it's going to be coming out soon. And let's go on to the next one. So how do we understand the sutras? If they're so compact and so cryptic, how do we understand them? And that's through these commentaries. And so the commentaries are key. All the great spiritual texts of India are commentated on exclusively. We have commentaries, for example, on the Bhagavad Gita, on the Upanishads by none other than Adi Shankara. And so all of these great texts, the greater the text, the greater those that comment upon them. And so if we look at the Yoga Sutras, so much of the information is condensed and cryptic. So we need to have these commentaries so that we don't have all of these different interpretations. And next. So one of the most foremost of these commentaries on the Yoga Sutras, Yoga Vyasa from the 5th century, it's one of the most complete and also closest to the time of the Yoga Sutras, between 200 BCE and 200 CE, based in Samkhya, very much a Samkhya basis. But none of these commentators really feel like they have to be forced into one philosophy or another. For example, this commentary from Vyasa, one thing that I noticed interesting, it's from the year, let's say the year 500, already has a list of asanas. As far as I know, that's the first list of asanas. So I think he only lists a few, but it's a list of asanas, and they're not all meditation asanas. I think that we have I think we might have the bow pose there. And so these people, also he brings in chakras when he wants to. So we say that it's based in Samkhya, but these people are really just looking at what is truth for them. So these commentaries, they tend to range just on what a person sees as appropriate. But this commentary by Vyasa, it forms the lens for all the subsequent commentaries. Next. So most use Vyasa as a foundation, but each has its own particular focus. Some people have a focus, some of these commentators have a focus that's just exactly the opposite. So we take that in the case of Vijnana Bhikshu from the 15th century. So a Vedanta monk, Advaita Vedanta, seeing the whole world as this oneness, and then through our practice, we become this oneness. We are all that one great soul. And of course, that's not the perspective of Samkhya and not the perspective of Patanjali within the Yoga Sutras. As far as we can see, it's more like each of us, each of these individual souls on their own journey to find their true being as Purusha. Certainly finding Purusha, there's going to be a sense of oneness, but that oneness certainly isn't stated as a goal from within the Yoga Sutras. Also, you've all been given a link, and so you may have questions as we go along. Write down those questions, put them on our link, and then we'll answer them in the best way we can, if possible. And next one. So that commentarial tradition continues to the present day, both popular and scholarly. Anything that seeks to understand our knowledge of the Yoga Sutras, including my little term paper, my 15-year end of term paper that you'll all receive at some point. Okay, and let's go on. So we're going to stop there for right now so we can actually go on to the Yoga Sutras, so we don't spend too much of time on introduction. But that's only about half of the introduction that you received, and you're going to receive the rest of it, and we're going to go over a little bit of the introduction each week. Does that sound good? Thumbs up? Okay, good. Otherwise, we don't want to bore you. I am committed not to bore you people. That is my commitment. Okay, so let's go on to the first sutra. I will not bore you or your money back. That's my guarantee. It'll have the first sutra. Keep going down.
Okay.
Keep going down. There, you passed it. There it is. Okay, we got to the first sutra. So we're going to do these word by word, and then we're going to then say the whole thing. Atta yoga Anushasanam all together. Atta yoga Anushasanam Atta yoga Anushasanam Atta yoga Anushasanam. Now, when the student is prepared, instruction in yoga begins. Okay, next one. So what we do when we get these sutras is we start to unpack them. And we're going to see that when we start to unpack these sutras, there's a lot to them. Obviously, now instruction in yoga begins. It's saying that, yeah, now we're starting the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It's also an invocation. Our study should be auspicious and fruitful. As we mentioned before, he's also saying atta, because it's paired with iti, which is the last word of the sutras there in fourth chapter. And so it says, thus it has been taught. So Patanjali is bowing to all of his teachers. He's saying that this is not my work. I didn't sit down and write this, but this is a compilation of everything that has come together up to this point. And next. Also, atta also means now, reminds us that yoga occurs only in the present moment. And we need to release our attachment both to the past and to the future to practice yoga successfully. So you see, this is what happens when we start to unpack these sutras. One word just starts to expand. Okay, keep going. So atta can also be translated as therefore. And an important resource for me in this project has been a man called Swami Vedabharati. So many of the concepts, a lot of the information that I've received, not only do I have his books, wasn't able to study with him personally, but was able to get a set of 108 CDs where he talks about the whole other Yoga Sutras. So this is really a concept that comes from him, that atta means that therefore that some process has occurred. Something occurred that allows you to practice yoga. And so that means that all our habitual ways of doing and being, we've seen that they're just not going to do it for us. I tried that, tried again, tried a third time, tried a fourth time. Some people who are very stubborn, like myself, 4 times would not be enough. We need to beat our heads against the wall multiple times before we start to change. I'm not sure if anyone is as hard-headed as me, but I'm sure everyone has beat their heads against the wall more than once before they've learned. And so this is what Patanjali is saying, that this Yoga Sutras is a crossroads. So I went down that crossroads once, I went down it twice, I went down it 3 times, that direction called Prakriti, the personality. I tried to find happiness, relationship, work, job, money, having a lot of yoga students, whatever it might be. And then what happens? COVID-19. So we can't control anything. And so what he's saying is, no, there's this other path, not that personality path, not that Prakriti path. It's this Purusha path. You're going to find the answer within yourself. You're not going to find the answer out in the world. Doesn't mean you need to go live in a cave, but it does mean that you're going to essentially find your life's purpose and meaning within yourself. So that's yoga as this crossroads. And that's the therefore some preliminary processes happen. And that preliminary process is you've come to that crossroads and you made a choice. Went there, did that, didn't get the t-shirt, not going to try that again. Next one. So at this crossroads, the recognition of our inner being becomes our absolute priority. And this first sutra, it's asking for a commitment. Atta yoga Anushasanam. It's saying now the journey of yoga begins. But to go on this journey, you're going to come to this crossroads. And at that crossroads, you're going to need to make a commitment. And it's that commitment of choosing between the personality and not just based on, well, when the personality is working okay, I'll go with the personality. And then when I'm having problems, then I'll go for yoga. So, and we all do that. We tend to kind of move back and forth. It's not, let's just say that that crossroads isn't fixed. So it's not as fixed, but Patanjali is saying it should be as fixed as possible. So we might go back and forth a little bit, but the idea here is we really need to make a commitment to that yoga journey. And next. So this yoga journey is also a crossroads in terms of learning. So in Prakriti, we're gaining pieces of information. We learn how to earn a living. We learn a new skill. We learn how to use Zoom. So fortunately, you folks are not getting the worst. I did Zoom for about 8 weeks here in Portuguese before you got me. So you're actually getting a fairly accomplished Zombie. But I had to learn to use Zoom, more or less, and I'm feeling a little more comfortable with it now. But so in this world of Prakriti, we are learning all these things, nothing wrong with it. But for example, if I take time and effort and practice and patience and more time and more effort, and then I scold Maria a little bit, then finally we'll get all of this Zoom into place. But at the yoga crossroads, it's different. All of that effort it really can't show me, it can't take me from me to me. All of that effort can't take me from me to me. So this crossroads is also a completely new way of learning. And yoga is asking me to release all those traditional ways of knowing and learning. And what Patanjali is saying, from my experience, is that which is going to help you learn most quickly is the practice of Samadhi. Everything else is going to take time. And of course, what's going to get you to Samadhi is surrender to God. Ishvara Pranidhana. So Samadhi is the quickest way to Samadhi, Ishvara Pranidhana. Next slide. So second word of the Yoga Sutras, yoga obviously means to join, to yoke. We've got all those definitions in our 200-hour yoga teacher training. And it actually has a lot of diverse meanings within India. But all of them share this idea of yoga as being methods and techniques for recognition of our true being through spiritual transformation and awakening. So whether it's Tantra, whether it's Vedanta, whether it's Bhakti, all of those are going to be methods and techniques for recognition of our true inner being through spiritual transformation and awakening. Those approaches and methodologies are actually pretty darn diverse when we start looking at them. And Patanjali is so unique in having this very strong focus on samadhi and also on stilling the movements of the mind. In some of these traditions, the stilling of the movements of the mind, as it's addressed in Patanjali, really wouldn't be a major focus at all. But within the Yoga Sutras, the stilling of the mind is certainly important. Go ahead. So the third word of this sutra, Anushasanam, so that's Anu, which means following, plus Shasanam. So it's Anu, to follow, and Shasanam, instruction, teaching, or discipline. So Anushasanam is a discipline following a specific spiritual tradition. In the Yoga Sutras, it's the entire lineage of the yoga teachings up to the time of Patanjali. Anushasanam also means to point out or to point toward, again evoking an image of a crossroads where the journey of yoga begins. So this Anushasanam also means a signpost, a pointer. So Atha Yoga Nushasanam. Now we see the signpost. Now we see the pointer that says yoga. So you come to this signpost, Anushasanam, and that signpost says yoga. Next. So we've seen that these words have so many different meanings when we start to unpack them. And this word Anushasanam is an example of this. So if we take the root of Anushasanam, which is Shas, we're also going to find that that's the root of Shastra, a sacred text. So Atha Yoga Nushasanam is saying that, yes, this Yoga Sutras is a sacred text. Shastra without a long A, Shastra with a short A means a sword. So the Yoga Sutras, Atha Yoga Nushasanam, welcome to that which will cut through ignorance. Welcome to the sword which will cut through ignorance. Shas is also the root of Shishya, meaning a disciple. So saying Atha Yoga Nushasanam, you have to be a disciple to yoga to begin this journey. Shas, interestingly, is also the cognate for our English word chastise. So our English word chastise comes from that word, from that root Shas. So, and chastise here means tapas. It means a spiritual discipline. So you'll only be able to follow the path of yoga if you take it as a spiritual discipline. Next slide. So as we unpack the sutra, we take all of these different meanings, and then we get this more complete meaning of Atha Yoga Nushasanam. The journey of yoga begins when we come to a crossroads and choose the path of true being through stilling the mind in samadhi. We undertake this journey as students committed to a discipline, guided by a tradition, living in each present moment. So we take all of the ways that we've unpacked all of these different words to finally come to this understanding of our sutra. So let's say it again. Atha Yoga Nushasanam. Atha Yoga Nushasanam. Atha Yoga Nushasanam. Atha Yoga Nushasanam. And on to our next slide. So the book, the Yoga Sutras in Practice, actually comes with a series of meditations. All of the sutras have meditations. So this is, some are shorter, some are longer, and that's why it's called Yoga Sutras in Practice. So this is a short one I'd like us to do now, just closing your eyes. And let's do this exercise together. So just a brief reflection. I'm watching you, checking everyone has their eyes closed. So when did you come to a crossroads and choose yoga? What inspired you? What motivated you at that crossroads? How has it changed the way you see yourself, others, and the world around you? So reflecting on that crossroads where you chose yoga, maybe it wasn't a complete choice. Maybe it was yoga class once a week. Maybe that yoga crossroads became more complete over time. What motivated you? Did you need exercise? Were you at a crisis in your life? Did you just see a sign that said yoga class and you were drawn to it? And then over your practice, how has it affected you? How has it changed your journey? How do you see yourself differently? How do you see others differently? How do you see life differently? So if this were our IYT class, I would like to ask you all actually to turn to the person who's next to you on Zoom and share, but that's not going to work. Turn to your Zoom partner and just say hi. Hi. But we won't be able to share. But what you can do later, you have that web page. What's the web page called? Where are they sharing? What's the group?
It's on Facebook. I already sent
Yeah,
it.
you have a Facebook group. So put your sharing on your Facebook group and others can read it and comment on your sharing. Does that sound good? Let's do it that way. Good, so let's go on to our next sutra. Okay, first the individual words. Yogaha, yogaha, chitta, chitta, vritti, vritti, nirodaha, nirodaha, yogaschitta vritti nirodaha, yogaschitta vritti nirodaha, yogaschitta vritti nirodaha, yogaschitta vritti nirodaha. So when we take the individual words and join them together, that's called sandhi, or joining. So it's a way that the individual sounds, the individual words are brought together to make a fluid, sonorous sound. So the different words come together. And also one thing to note here, if you look at your word varti, there's a little dot under the R. There's R as a vowel in Sanskrit and R as a consonant. When we see the little dot under the R, that means that's R as a vowel. It means the mouth is open. So it's yoga chitta varti nirodaha. So it's a mouth open R. Yoga is stilling the activity of the mind. Next. So Sutra 1.2 defines yoga as Nirodaha, stilling, the Vrittayaha, activity of the chitta, mind. Yoga is stilling the activity of the mind. So that word chitta, it encompasses manas, that's our everyday mind, all the thoughts and feelings, all the dumb things we say to ourselves and to others, and to some extent the nice things too. All there in manas, the everyday mind. Ahamkara, our sense of individuality, I am the doer. Everything revolves around me. I think, I feel, I act, I believe in relation to all that is I and me, is ahamkara. And then we have buddhi, the higher mind. Buddhi is that higher mind. So when we say dumb things to ourselves, when we criticize ourselves, I can stop and say, hey, that's just conditioning. So that's our higher mind, buddhi. And also smriti, we have that open R again, smriti, which is memory. So the whole mind, when Patanjali says that yoga is stilling the activity of the mind, he means the whole mind, and we'll see that later. Everything that happens within the mind, all cognitive functioning, eventually, ultimately comes into a state of absolute stillness. Therefore, the stilling of the mind applies to everything. And that becomes interesting when we start to talk about stilling memory, stilling sleep. But all those in a certain way will come into stillness within the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Next. So it's all of the mental activities, and so that word is virtaya, virtayaha. That's the plural of virtihi. So all of the mind's activities, and we'll see that word a lot, virtayaha, and also in the singular virtihi, all the mind's mental activities. Derived from the verbal root virt, which means to whirl, suggesting a whirlpool. So before we begin practicing yoga, I'm sure a whirlpool, I almost think of flushing a toilet, unfortunately, when I think of this word vert. So when we talk about things going down, at least as we progress along the yoga journey, maybe our minds aren't so much like a toilet bowl. They actually do become purified. Though we're not going to use any of those cleansing agents in the way Donald Trump has suggested. We're going to use them only in the toilet bowl. And so, but this vert is a whirlpool. It's literally going down the drain or being flushed down the toilet in a certain way. And so these virtayaha, the more we program them, the more we reinforce them, the more we reinforce that downward movement, the more we reinforce that negativity. So this root, this word virtayaha, is really very applicable. It's literally going down the drain by being addicted to our negativity. Next. So these movements fall into two broad categories. And even as we start, we'll see this later when we get to our fifth sutra, and we'll have time to talk about it more. But it's very important right from the start to see that our mind has two basic ways of functioning. We've got the klishta virtayaha and the aklishta virtayaha. So we think of yoga as being very complex, but it's also very simple. All those thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that make us more free, those are the helpful vrittis. Those are the aklishta ones. So we've got thoughts, feelings that are helpful. A negative thought comes up and we say, no, that's just conditioning coming from my family. So I stopped that. I took that negative thought and then I stopped it in its tracks. I, in a certain way, turned that negative thought into a positive one by seeing that it's just conditioning. So we say that yoga is complex, but it's actually very simple. Things arise in my mind, they're going to be helpful or they're going to be harmful. Those which keep me tied to my patterns of thought and belief and conditioning are going to be harmful. And those things which make me more light, more free, more at peace, even something as simple as practicing yoga postures, all of those things are going to be helpful. So they're really just these two categories. And Patanjali is asking us to, at least at the start, be able to begin to discern between that which is helpful and that which is harmful. Next. So, and he says that all of these vrittaya are to be Nirodaha. So you've all seen these definitions of yoga's chitta vritti Nirodaha that says yoga is restraining the mind, yoga is suppressing the movements of the mind, yoga is controlling the movements of the mind. There's so many different ways of saying it, and obviously those translations are just trying to be true to the meaning of this word Nirodha, because it means to restrict, to restrain, to suppress, to control. But certainly that's not the intention of Patanjali, because as we'll see when we get into verse 12, verse 13, he's presenting this balance of will and surrender, that you can't restrict anything. You can't ultimately control anything, because you can't use force or control to recognize that which you already are. So certainly in deepest samadhi, there aren't going to be any more movements of the mind. But what we're really talking about here is a natural stillness. It's a natural stillness that comes into being through recognizing who we are, through recognizing that our very nature is stillness, it's silence, it's peace. And through the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, through samadhi, we're going to recognize that. So although Nirodha literally means restrict, restrain, suppress, or control, stillness for me, I think, is actually the best definition. Okay, and next. And we mentioned all this can't be forced or achieved. This stilling occurs primarily during samadhi. And as we get into chapter 1, we're going to see 7 levels of samadhi. I would just like to say that for me, personally, the practice of samadhi has been the most helpful thing for me on the spiritual journey. So there are so many different methods of techniques. But for me, coming from a background of trauma, that, you know, I think maybe depending on where you start, you just really need some big guns. And so for me, samadhi was, I would call samadhi the elephant gun. Not that we're talking about killing elephants, don't get me wrong. An elephant gun tranquilizer to put a tagging collar on them, of course. But so that occurs in samadhi. And there are all of these different levels of samadhi which we're going to practice. And in deepest samadhi, the idea is that the mind really does resolve into absolute pure consciousness, where there are no thoughts because there is no mind. In deepest samadhi, we completely transcend the mind, and we're all going to do that in this 4 weeks. Show me your hands. Everyone ready to transcend the mind? Good. We're going to do it as a team. It's going to be teamwork. So Patanjali really is talking about transcending the mind. There will be no thoughts, there will be no feelings, there will be no beliefs, because none of those exist within Purusha. None of those exist within pure consciousness. And in samadhi, the all cognition is completely transcended. Okay, and let's go on. And next, we went back, okay. So experience deep samadhi is gradual. And so it's a practice, and that's why I believe Patanjali gives those, there are 8 levels in total, but 7 that are really levels of practice. And I think he gives those levels exactly so that samadhi can be made accessible. And that'll be one of our goals here in this 4 weeks. But until we get to that point, does that mean that I have to have my mind completely silent with all of the vrittis still before I can say I'm practicing yoga? So my approach would be to say no, that of course that stillness and samadhi is very important, but I would say that conscious witnessing is also samadhi. That even though there is that deepest samadhi, which is pure consciousness, that conscious witnessing is also samadhi. So that conscious witnessing called saksham, and of course the witness, most of you know this word already, sakshi. So we witness the vritaya, the thoughts, the feelings, the beliefs, all of the cognitions with neutrality and objectivity, because the mind will say the darndest things. I remember a long time ago from Kripalu, about 30 years ago, when Amrit Desai taught there, and he actually had some brilliant things to say. He said, everyone has a mind, so why even mind it? Why even pay attention? So the mind, up to a certain point, in certain ways, it will continue to say dumb things. It will continue to have negativity. And so another way of silencing the mind is just to simply, and it's not paying attention, it's witnessing. That's a mind. That's what it does. And we can learn from it. We can learn from our vrittis. We can learn from our virtaya, because as we listen, as we watch without believing, without identifying, then we can start to see what are the beliefs, what are the tendencies. We'll see those tendencies later. They're called vasanas. Vasanas, the deep tendencies. So we don't want to believe the mind. We don't want to take it seriously. And eventually we'll begin to start laughing, because the mind will say just the absolute craziest, stupidest things. It'll come up with violence. It'll come up with all kinds of crazy plans and schemes and dreams and desires. And anyone who would take all that seriously, and I think this is where Patanjali is heading, to take any of that seriously, you would literally have to be crazy. You would really literally have to be crazy to take your mind seriously. All the things that it comes up with. And so this witnessing is also a kind of stilling. At first it's, yeah, got that. I remember, yeah, okay. And then eventually, so we start to see what is the tendency? What are the beliefs? And then through that witnessing, those vrittis, those virtaya, they actually start to silence themselves. Does that make sense? It's kind of like someone that just keeps talking, and you don't pay attention, and eventually they just shut up. So on to the next slide. So I think we've said most of this. So as we disidentify, that leads to the resolution of inner and outer conflicts. And the movements may continue, but they no longer disturb us. So those movements of the mind, as we witness them, they start to lose their sting. And then, so when we combine that experience of samadhi, following those steps of samadhi, we'll be going through in these 4 weeks, and then combine that with the witnessing, that's where we start to come to Purusha. So the witnessing is a kind of yoga's chitta vritti nirodaha. And the samadhi is another kind of yoga's chitta vritti nirodaha. Both things are silencing the mind, and then they finally come together. And that's where the real stillness comes in. So let's say that again. Yoga's chitta vritti nirodaha. Yoga's chitta vritti nirodaha. Yoga's chitta vritti nirodaha. And next slide. So now we go into our exercise. So closing the eyes. So to what extent do you experience stillness of the mind in meditation? When thoughts and feelings do arise, to what extent are you willing to witness them without identifying? To what extent are you able to carry this witnessing into daily living? So we have these two kinds of stilling the mind. One is the deep meditation. So reflect, how is your meditation? How often do you come to those moments of absolute stillness? And then both in meditation and in daily living, to what extent are you able to call the mind's bluff? I'm not going to believe that. And witness without identifying, without reacting, without repressing, without suppressing. To what extent are you willing to and able to witness saksham? And then how do those two come together as your spiritual practice? That is your whole spiritual practice. Where is your spiritual practice at this point? Where is your meditation? Where is that silence not in itself, silence not as an end, but silence as a reflection of Purusha, your true being, who you are in reality, silence as a reflection of authenticity. And then how do you carry that into daily living? Your ability to witness. And then how does that witnessing feed back into your ability to go into meditation more deeply? So just take a moment, take a few minutes to just write down some thoughts. And then, of course, putting any thoughts or questions into our group. And I'll be reading the posts on your group. And in others, if you want to comment on other people's posts, I think we'd all like that. Is that okay? Raise a hand. Can we comment on each other's posts? Yeah. So it's a little bit just like sharing an IYT class. And so put your posts on there. And then I will complete with a song. And that will be our first day's class. Maria, you did a great job. Thank you. You too, Kalani. I'm going to introduce our staff here. And at some point in the 4 weeks, I'll take you out and introduce you to our llamas and alpacas, okay? I can't bring them in here to the recording studio, but I'll take the cell phone outside and introduce you to the llamas and alpacas. Be still and listen till only one voice can be heard. Be still and listen to one song, one word. Be touched and be healed. Receive the light and the sound. Be touched and be healed. Believe that love is all around. and know that I love you. It's all I keep trying to say. Know that I love you, but trying and talking keep blocking the way. Be still and listen. Till only one voice can be heard. Be still and listen to one song, one word. One word. One word. One word. One word, and the word is Om. Om. Namaste. Until next week. Have a great week. Send all your questions and comments. Bye for now. You may turn me off. You may unzoom me.